You must be aware of how dangerous the Hells Angels are, and that law enforcement always makes an effort to espionage such criminal organizations. Hells Angels was no different, however. The group's admissions were wilder than anticipated. With the network spreading in over a dozen countries, Hells Angel Club is considered one of the most vicious and powerful motorcycle clubs in the world. So, how did this club establish itself? What are the stories of infiltrating Hells Angels? What are its stringent sex rules? In today's video, we'll examine the Hells Angels covert chapter and the disclosures it produced. Hells Angels sex rule. Strict sex laws were revealed by an undercover agent who infiltrated the infamous Hells Angels motorcycle club. Jay Dobbins, who is now 61 years old, spent 2 years investigating the Hells Angels as part of a clandestine operation to expose the criminal organization the gang was associated with. He was working for the ATF Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives at the time. His false persona as Jay Davis or Jaybird was used between 2001 and 2003. In order to join the group's Mesa, Arizona chapter, he purported to be a debt collector and gun runner. He quickly became aware of the strict rules that all members were needed to abide by when having sex with women after successfully receiving an invitation to join. They ran the risk of suffering some violent repercussions if they didn't. He revealed the rules by claiming that there is a hierarchy within the gang with regard to women in a video interview with Insider. You are not permitted to speak with some older ladies who are the wives or boyfriends of other members. There is a severe penalty if you are discovered trying to flirt with a member's wife or girlfriend, and you had better avoid being discovered attempting to accomplish it. However, Dobbins clarified that members were free to have multiple affairs with the same lady and that doing so was acceptable for the bikers. He went on to suggest that women switch between groups as well. Dobbins claimed that parties happen frequently at the chapter, but wouldn't say whether sex was permitted within the clubhouse. The crime fighter asserted the Hells Angels are a complicated organization with members who have a variety of lifestyles and interests in other passages of his interview. The roots and rules. In 1948, the Hells Angels motorcycle gang was founded in Fontana, California. With more than 100 chapters scattered across more than 29 countries, they have subsequently developed into one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in the world. Following a bloody altercation between the Hells Angels and their bitter adversaries, the Mongols Motorcycle Club, Dobbins infiltrated the gang as part of Operation Black Biscuit. Dobbins's infiltration of the Hells Angels was a component of that investigation because the group was known for its connections to risky criminal enterprises. He had staged the death of a rival gang member using blood and guts from the butcher shop to set up a horrifying murder scene. It was discovered during the investigation. Dobbins admitted that while he was a member of the Hells Angels inner circle, he was made aware of stricter rules about how members communicated with one another. He also falsified drug transactions. If these regulations were broken, there would be severe consequences. One such regulation said that if you see a Hells Angel while wearing sunglasses, you must lift your shades and address the individual directly. He was also advised to take off his riding gloves before shaking hands with a Hells Angel if he was wearing them. Another guideline is to never touch a Hells Angels patch and never, ever pat them on the back. However, he was the one who made such errors and was penalized for them. On occasion, he even received a spanking. The former agent also revealed that anyone who broke off ties with the Hells Angels may have any property connected to the group taken from them. That includes getting rid of whatever tattoos they might have had. Additionally, he said that if you behave badly, they will come and take away your motorbike and cut off your vest because they consider it to be their property. Dobbins also said that a significant portion of Hells Angels members aren't actively participating in crime, which is surprising given the organization's reputation as a gang that frequently commits numerous crimes. He said it was a myth that every member of the gang was a drug addict and claimed that some were fitness enthusiasts, adding that some branches of the group run a fairly clean company. He added that it was a lie to think that every member was an addict. Their healthy eating, ample relaxation, and abstinence from alcohol and tobacco paid off for them. However, the undercover investigation did turn up proof that the Hells Angels were involved in numerous unlawful acts, according to the US Department of Justice, including, but not limited to, the sale and acquisition of firearms, the manufacture and distribution of methamphetamine, the distribution of cocaine, heroin and marijuana, as well as murder. As a result of Operation Black Biscuit, 55 Hells Angels and its affiliates members were indicted. 16 high-ranking gang members were among those charged with murder, murder for hire, racketeering and drug trafficking. The charges against half of the defendants were withdrawn or reduced as a result of the plea agreements, and the cases against 5 of the defendants were totally dismissed. Dobbins believes that following the arrests, the group started to threaten him and his family with violence once they found out he was actually working for the government. The Hells Angels had murder contracts out on him, and the threats against him and his family began to mount. The so-called threats were too real for him and his loved ones when the family's house was burned down in 2008. His wife and children somehow survived the frightening occurrence and were able to evacuate, despite the fact that they were sound asleep inside the house during it. Dobbins has claimed that by prioritizing the undercover investigation over guaranteeing the safety of his loved ones, he betrayed his family. Nevertheless, even after retiring, he kept on criticizing the operation. Evidently, Joshua O'Brien was not the only person to attempt to study the Hells Angels. Another, much more fascinating inquiry was carried out as a result of his efforts. To put it simply, things didn't go well for him. Controversial Hells Angels. Joshua O'Brien regained consciousness on July 12th inside the Cool Cats tattoo shop in Englewood after being choked and beaten. He was bleeding, had Hells Angels motorcycle club members all around him, and had his hands and ankles bound. Owner of the business, Dusty Ulrich, started covering up O'Brien's death head tattoo, which represents membership in the illustrious biker club. Ulrich replaced it with the word bad, as the other Hells Angels took pictures with their cell phones. Ulrich then threatened to kill him and slice his throat if he ever revealed the information to anyone. However, O'Brien reported what had happened to the authorities, sparking a 5-month inquiry into the illustrious bikers that culminated in a raid on the Hells Angels clubhouse in Denver's Highland District. During the early morning raids there and elsewhere, authorities seized methamphetamine, cocaine, cash, and numerous firearms. 13 Hells Angels members, ranging in age from 30 to 81, were accused of violating Colorado's laws against organized crime and of assault, burglary, and kidnapping. Due to the withholding of the arrest affidavits for the first 13 guys, the accusations against the 14 men remained unknown for months. A 14th member of the Destroyer motorcycle gang was also charged. However, in Denver County Court earlier that month, during preliminary hearings for 3 defendants, prosecutors presented their case against the Hells Angels, and their arrest affidavits were made public after a Denver Post reporter asked for the documents to be unsealed. The case is focused on O'Brien, the former member who claimed men beat him, according to an arrest report. He'd already given his brothers a call, following their suspicions that he was speaking with law enforcement during a previous search of his Lakewood motorcycle shop. The Hells Angels Denver chapter was involved in meth stash homes, prostitution, the selling of firearms, and money laundering, according to O'Brien, who also provided investigators with this information. O'Brien allegedly told police, "If you want love and hugs, you go to the Rocky Mountain chapter, you go to the Denver charter. If you want guns and drugs." Hells Angels defense attorneys said in court that the prosecution's whole case was predicated on the testimony of a man who had arrest warrants out for him in several counties for drug possession, car theft, and missing court appearances. During the hearing, Hells Angels president Jason Sellers' lawyer Brian Russo said that it doesn't take a huge leap to understand he had the motive to fabricate that he was in serious trouble with the law and with the people he asked for help. He became overwhelmed and took advantage of the first opportunity to create this story. O'Brien admitted to detectives that, before things went bad, he had given up his spouse and a lucrative career to devote his life to the Hells Angels. When Lakewood police searched his motorcycle shop and detained O'Brien on weapons charges, everything changed. The Hells Angels have a rule that prohibits members from speaking with law enforcement. The arrest complaint states that O'Brien believed the others were scared because he was. On June 28, 2019, O'Brien reported to the police that he had been attacked by a group of Hells Angels at a mysterious stash house, assaulted and then fled. Then, in July, he was assaulted in a garage and led to a tattoo shop in Englewood where his ink was covered up, an approach used by the Hells Angels to get someone out. O'Brien stated in the arrest paperwork that the Hells Angels stole cash, motorcycles, and tools worth thousands of dollars from him before leaving him wounded in a Denver alley. A week after the event in July, O'Brien called the police from the Jefferson County Jail. During a series of interviews, he provided detectives with information about the organization's makeup and the extent of their unlawful activities. Before the raid, he allegedly had 4 pounds of meth from the cartel destined for Hells Angels chapters in other states at his Lakewood shop. O'Brien asserted that the club had sources in law enforcement in the Denver metro area who gave them information about investigations and raids, and that they knew the locations of stash homes in Minnesota and Arizona. According to O'Brien's evidence in the arrest complaint, the gang also plunders motorcycles for parts and engages in a significant amount of arms dealing. Whether law enforcement was focusing on stash homes or chapters in other states is unknown. The members of the Denver branch are accused of 2 assaults on O'Brien in June and July, in addition to the general organized crime allegations. Attorneys for the defense claimed they intended to challenge O'Brien's veracity. When he spoke with detectives, he left out important details of his story, like the fact that the night of the assault, he had stolen a truck out of Erie. Russo informed the judge that the government was aware of their problems with the witness and that the evidence they relied on came from a source who had no relationship to the truth. When police are looking for them, the Hells Angels of Denver have a history of evading legal troubles. After 18 members were assaulted outside of their offices and detained for hours, the city paid $50,000 to settle a lawsuit in 2003, even though police found no proof of wrongdoing and the mayor officially apologized.
The Hells Angels have become an iconic symbol of the open road. Join us as we rev our engines and dive into the fascinating world of the Hells Angels, where the throttle is wide open and the adventure never ends. Who are Hells Angels? How was the group created? What is this group famous for? Can anyone actually retire from Hells Angels? If so, what are the consequences? The Hells Angels, a motorcycle club with a fierce reputation, have a bit of a mystery surrounding their beginnings. Some say they started on March 17, 1948 in Fontana, California, when a bunch of small motorcycle clubs decided to join forces. Others claim it was on November 15, 1951, in San Bernardino, thanks to a guy named Dick White from the Redlands Roadrunners. Now, why are they called the Hells Angels? Well, there are a couple of stories about that too. According to their own website, the name came from Arvid Olsen, a friend of the club's founders. He had served in a squadron during World War II called the Hells Angels, and that's where the inspiration came from. But in a letter to the Guinness Book of World Records, another member said it was from a different squadron, the one from the 303rd Bombardment Group during World War II. So there's a bit of a mix-up there. The name might also have something to do with an old Howard Hughes film called Hells Angels from back in 1930, which featured some crazy aviation stunts. By the way, they know there's supposed to be an apostrophe in Hells, but they don't care. They say, "It is you who miss it. We don't." They're pretty tough, after all. The early history of the Hells Angels is a bit fuzzy, and different folks tell different tales. But it's said that they officially got things rolling with a charter in Fontana in 1950. After that, their chapters started popping up all over California, thanks to members who roamed from one city to another. In 1954, the San Francisco chapter got going, and it was supposedly made up of former members of the Market Street Commandos. A North Sacramento chapter followed in 1956, and another one in Sacramento the next year. These Sacramento chapters were started by 2 brothers, James Miles and Pat Miles, who used to be part of the Hell Bent for Glory Biker Club. But eventually, the Sacramento crew disbanded and moved to Richmond as a Nomads chapter in 1965. Now here's a big name you might have heard of, Ralph "Sonny" Barger. He's the guy who founded the Oakland charter in 1957. Barger says there were other early chapters in places like Gardena, and most of these chapters didn't even know about each other. Imagine that, a bunch of guys riding their bikes, not knowing there are other guys out there doing the same thing and calling themselves Hells Angels. But old Sonny Barger is often given credit for bringing all these different chapters together under some common club rules. Now, some folks say that the San Francisco Hells Angels were actually organized in 1953 by a guy named Rocky Graves, who was already a member from San Bernardino, or Burdu as they call it. This suggests that the San Francisco crew knew about their roots from the start. In 1955, they reorganized with 13 members and had a smaller logo. Frank Sadalek was the president at the time. Oakland, led by Sonny Barger, had a bigger version of the Death's Head patch, which they nicknamed the Barger Larger. This bigger patch became the club standard. Here's where things get really interesting. The club started to become a big deal in the 1960s, especially in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. They kind of became part of the whole counterculture movement. You know, that free-spirited, rebellious vibe of the 60s. They rubbed shoulders with some pretty famous names like Ken Kesey and his Merry Pranksters, Allen Ginsberg, Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, Timothy Leary, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Mick Farren, and even Tom Wolfe. Remember Hunter S. Thompson? He's the gonzo journalist, and he wrote a book about the Hells Angels that really put him on the map. So, you could say the Angels played a part in launching his career. Here's a fun tidbit. From 1968 to 1969, the Club of San Francisco had their headquarters right on Ashbury Street, just across from the Grateful Dead's house. Can you imagine what those street corners were like back then? But it wasn't all about partying and hanging out with rock stars. In 1973, Hells Angels from different branches got pretty serious about something unexpected. They protested at an Environmental Protection Agency hearing. Why? Well, it was about a proposed transportation plan that included rules about motorcycles to help California meet the new Clean Air Act standards. These guys were really into their bikes, and they weren't about to let anyone mess with that. Now, you might be wondering how anyone can get a membership in this club. The membership. First of all, you can't just be anyone off the street. To even have a shot at becoming a Hells Angels prospect, you need to meet some basic criteria. You gotta have a valid driver's license because, well, you're going to be riding a motorcycle. And not just any bike will do, it's gotta be over 750cc, which means a pretty powerful machine. Plus, you need to have the right combination of personal qualities. And here's a big one: no child molesters are allowed. They also frown upon folks who have applied to become police officers or prison guards. And of course, intravenous drug use is a big no-no among club members. Now, once you've checked all those boxes and you're itching to join the Hells Angels, here's how it goes down. It's a phased process, and it's not quick. First, you start as a hang-around. That means you get invited to some club events, or maybe you meet up with club members at their usual spots. You're basically testing the waters, seeing if this is really for you. If you're still interested after that, you might get asked to become an associate. This status typically lasts for a year or two. During this time, you're sort of like an apprentice. You're learning the ropes, getting to know the club's ways, and proving your loyalty. After the associate phase, if the club members think you've got what it takes, you become a prospect. Now, as a prospect, you get to participate in some club activities, but you don't have voting privileges just yet. They're still evaluating whether you're a good fit. And finally, if you've made it through all these phases, and the club members unanimously agree, you become a full member, or as they call it, full patch. That's when you get the whole shebang, the complete four-piece insignia, including the iconic Death Head logo, 2 rockers, one that says Hells Angels, and the other with your state or territory, and the rectangular MC patch below the wing of the Death's Head. Now, here's a twist. Even though you've earned those patches, they're not really yours. They belong to the Hells Angels Club. So if you ever decide to leave the club, or if they kick you out for some reason, you've got to return those patches. It's a sign of your loyalty to the club, and they take it seriously. Being a Hells Angel isn't just about wearing patches, though. It comes with responsibilities. Members have to pay dues, and they're required to attend mandatory club meetings and motorcycle runs. Those chapter meetings, often referred to as church, usually happen at clubhouses or a member's place. Back in the day, in 1978, members had to shell out $20 a month to the local chapter and another $10 to the state chapter. The money wasn't just pocketed, it was used to fund things like motorcycle runs and funerals. And it also helped club officers attend state and national meetings. In the United States, there's been at least one Hells Angels charter that folks say requires candidates to be white males. In a BBC interview back in 2000, Sonny Barger, a big figure in the club, mentioned, "The club, as a whole, is not racist, but we probably have enough racist members that no black guy is going to get in it." Back then, there weren't any black members in the club. Now that's not to say there haven't been non-white members. In 1967, Hunter S. Thompson wrote about a Chinese Mel from San Francisco and Charlie, a young Negro from Oakland, who were part of the club. In 1990, there was a Chinese-American member in the Cleveland chapter named Stephen Wayne Yee, who was convicted of murder. Things got a bit tricky in Vancouver in 1983 when the Hells Angels merged with the Satan's Angels MC, and the latter had a black member. The San Francisco and Anchorage chapters weren't thrilled about this, but the situation got resolved when the guy decided to change his nationality to Hawaiian. There's also an unsanctioned Hells Angels chapter in Windsor, England, which got official status in 1985 after its only black member, John Mickelson, passed away in police custody. But here's an interesting twist. Gregory Woolley, a high-ranking member of the Rockers MC in Montreal, became an associate of the Club Montreal chapter in the 90s. Woolley was the protege and bodyguard of Hells Angel boss Maurice Boucher, who had some ties to a white supremacist motorcycle gang. So, it's a bit complicated. Now, Barger, in that same 2000 interview, was pretty blunt about the racial divide. He said, "If you're a motorcycle rider and you're white, you want to join the Hells Angels. If you're black, you want to join the Dragons. That's how it is whether anyone likes it or not. We don't have any blacks, and they don't have any whites." But when asked if that could ever change, he left the door open, saying, "Anything can change. I can't predict the future." And here's an interesting tidbit. Toby Levingston, who founded the black motorcycle club East Bay Dragons MC, wrote in his book that he and Barger have a long-lasting friendship. He also mentioned that the Hells Angels and the Dragons have a mutual friendship, and they sometimes hang out and ride together. So while there might be differences, there are also connections. Back in 1966, in an Ebony article about motorcycle rebels in the African American community, the Chosen Few Motorcycle Club said they didn't see any racial animosity in the club. They even mentioned that when the Hells Angels rolled into their territory, they all partied together. A club member interviewed for the magazine insisted that there was no racial prejudice in any of their clubs, even though he admitted that they didn't have any black members at the time. At one point in the 1970s, the Hells Angels tried to bring different motorcycle clubs together and offered every member of the Chosen Few a Hells Angels patch. Interestingly, the Chosen Few declined the offer. So there's been some back and forth on this topic over the years. The club, like many organizations, have had their share of complexities when it comes to race. It's not a straightforward issue, and opinions and policies have shifted over time. Now let's talk about what would happen if someone were to leave the club. The retirement. Leaving the Hells Angels, as George Christie experienced it, wasn't just like quitting any ordinary club. It was a major decision that took him almost 4 decades to make. Imagine being a part of something that defines your identity for so long, and then deciding it's time to walk away. George Christie's journey with the Hells Angels began in the 70s when he finally got his dream of joining the club. To him, it wasn't just a club, it was like joining a brotherhood, a tight-knit group where trust and loyalty were everything. He felt special, and his fellow angels welcomed him with open arms. But after 35 years of being a leader in the Ventura chapter, Christie had a change of heart. His personal beliefs started to clash with the club's activities. He realized that the very things they once rebelled against were now becoming a part of who they were. So in 2011, he made the tough decision to officially part ways with the Hells Angels. Leaving wasn't just about some minor disagreement. It was a profound shift in his values and principles. As he put it, he felt like they had become the very people they used to fight against. Imagine sitting in a meeting with your longtime comrades and telling them that you can't be a part of this anymore because it goes against everything you stand for. Christie's efforts to make peace with rival motorcycle clubs also hit a wall. What he saw as an opportunity to end fights and conflicts was met with resistance. It must have been frustrating to try and bring about change within an organization you'd been a part of for so long, only to face opposition. George Christie followed all the proper steps to formally exit the motorcycle club. He talked to the members, explained why he wanted to quit, and handed over his patch. Everything seemed cool, and it appeared that the members understood his reasons. But then, just a few weeks later, came a phone call that changed everything. Christie learned that he was considered out bad with the club. Why? There were talks about him being an informant, which he adamantly denied. Being out bad was like a punch to the gut for Christie. It meant that the members, who he once saw as friends and family, were no longer allowed to have any contact with him. It's kind of like going through a divorce, where at first, everyone tries to be civil. They might not be thrilled with your decision, but they get it. But then, things took a nasty turn. and it got pretty rough. In 2016, Christie wrote a book called Exile on Front Street: My Life as a Hell's Angel and Beyond. In this book, he spilled the beans about his journey from being a former Marine to joining the biggest motorcycle club around. He talked about all the wild stuff that happened during his time with the Hells Angels and what life was like after he left. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Christie. After leaving, he faced a lot of tough stuff. People called him a coward, rumors swirled around him, and he even ended up doing some time in prison for a conspiracy charge. George Christie's story shows that leaving a club like the Hells Angels isn't just a clean break. It can be messy, complicated, and can even come with serious consequences. But sometimes when you feel it's time to move on, you've got to follow your own path, even if it means facing some harsh challenges along the way. But not everyone who decides to leave the organization goes through a tough and messy exit like George Christie did. Take David LaBrava, for example. You might know him as Happy Loman from the TV show Sons of Anarchy. LaBrava had some serious street credibility with the Hells Angels. He was a member of the Oakland chapter, and he even got involved in a little showbiz when he became a technical advisor for Sons of Anarchy. He was there to make sure the show got the whole motorcycle club thing right. But guess what? He ended up getting a role on the show. In 2008, LaBrava ran into some legal trouble and got arrested on misdemeanor and drug possession charges. But that didn't stop him from being a devoted member of the Hells Angels for years. Fast forward to 2019, and LaBrava decided it was time to leave the club. He made the announcement on Instagram, where he said, "I want to say I am no longer a member of the largest motorcycle club in the world, the Hells Angels, Mackie. The only club I am a member of now is the human race." That's a pretty deep statement, right? What's interesting is that LaBrava left the club on good terms. It was his choice, and he made sure to mention that he was no longer a patch holder. In Hells Angels lingo, that means he's not in the club anymore. He even called himself a civilian, which is a big shift from being part of a motorcycle club. But here's the cool part. LaBrava didn't just say, "I'm out." He took a moment to thank the Hells Angels for the time he spent with them. It seems like his departure was respectful and amicable. David LaBrava's story shows that not everyone's journey out of the Hells Angels is filled with drama and conflict. Sometimes it's a personal decision, and you can part ways with the club in a peaceful and respectful way. It's a reminder that each person's experience is unique,